Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. Hello, I'm talking to Yolanda Santos Adams, a lifelong Kenosha resident. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
When did your family move to Kenosha?
Well, my father, Joseph Santos, and my mom, Raquel Santos, they left San Antonio in 1955 to come to Kenosha.
Okay. And how big was the family who moved up?
Yeah, at that time, my father came with 7 children, and two of my siblings were born later in Kenosha. But he also brought his sister, Consuelo Rendon, with him. So in the car traveling with him were 7 children and 3 adults in one car.
A big car, huh?
Yeah.
And what was the reason for him moving up to Kenosha?
Well, word got to San Antonio and all the Texas, the bigger cities, that there was work in Wisconsin. And they were pretty familiar with Wisconsin because they did migrant work over here, and also in Minnesota and some of the other states. But Texas, the immigrants from Texas knew that there was work here. But he was actually asked by a farmer to come to Wisconsin to work in the fields.
Okay. And when he got to Kenosha, what did the farmer expect?
Well, my dad told us the story for years that the farmer's still looking for him because the farmer thought he was paying transportation for 10 adults. But what he didn't know was we were all under the age of, I think, 12. So he never did report to that farmer. What he did was he came and he applied at American Motors Corporation at the time, where everybody was getting hired. You applied, you usually got hired whether you had education or not back in those days. So the jobs were plentiful, and so he got hired there.
And then he worked there?
And he worked there until his retirement.
Okay.
So all his life he worked, all his time in Kenosha, he worked at American Motors.
Okay, so you mentioned that people in San Antonio and the big cities in Texas knew about Wisconsin as a place to come and work. Was there a large influx of Hispanics from Texas?
Yes.
Up this direction at the time?
Absolutely. Most of the people that were coming to Wisconsin that were Hispanic were coming to work either in the fields or in the manufacturing plants. So we had a lot of people that came to work in Racine, like at Case, Kenosha. Of course, American Motors was the big employment at the time, the big factory, and some of the other smaller factories. But the people from Texas were coming because most of them were being encouraged to come to work in the fields. Okay. And so, but they had already heard that there was better paying jobs and jobs with benefits with the United Auto Workers.
So would you call this kind of a number of people, a large number of people, a migration of Hispanics? What would you call it?
It was a migration of Hispanics, and it was word of mouth. So for instance, my father and my mother came, but then they told their friends, and they came, and then they told their friends. So it was spread by word of mouth to relatives and friends who also, wanted a good job, a good paying job. So they came.
Okay. And where did you grow up then? What part of the city?
Yes. So then, when we arrived here, I was 2, and I have a twin brother, so we were 2. So we were the youngest of the 7 children, and we grew up. We first started what is now 39th and 45th Street. The house is no longer there. There used to be farmers' fields across the street back then, in those years. But we started there. My father actually rented a house at the time. And then he bought his first house when I was in 3rd grade, and it was close to Fonte Foods on 14th Avenue and 50th Street. Okay. So we lived there for until I grew up. We were in that house, and my parents actually owned that house.
Okay. And what do you remember about growing up in that neighborhood?
In that particular neighborhood, it was an Italian neighborhood, and a lot of Italian immigrants. So we had Italian adults that didn't speak fluent English. They spoke broken English. We were the only Hispanic family in the neighborhood. So I remember, growing up and babysitting for the families that lived in our neighborhood from 50th Street to 52nd Street on 14th Avenue, where the Boys and Girls Club is today. That was primarily Italian. Fonte Foods was Italian owned. And at that time we were going to schools. We were going to elementary schools. We went to the old Weisskopf School, and then that got closed, and we went to Bain, the old Bain School. And then we went to Washington Junior High and Bradford High School. So we were in that district. So I remember they were welcoming. We were Hispanic, but they were welcoming, but my dad could speak Italian. And so they took to him really well. My dad spent time in Italy in World War II. So he made a lot of friends because he could speak Italian. So we kind of fit in.
And were there a lot of children to play with? What kind of a neighborhood was it? Full of Italian families with children?
Yeah, we didn't go to school with, they had more little children. So, I don't recall ever having friends in the neighborhood other than there was a big laundromat across the street that was owned by a Delmar Grable. And he had a son and a daughter, and we were friends with them. So we would go across the street and play with them, go to church with them, go to school with them. And then we had some neighbors to the north, which would be the left of our house, that were they were good friends of my mom and dad's, and we used to babysit for them. And so we knew that child who was the age of my younger sister. But I didn't really go to school or know any older kids in our neighborhood. It was mostly, they all had little kids that needed to be, they need babysitters for. So my sister and I came in really handy because we were of the age to babysit.
Okay. What do you remember about going to school in elementary school in Kenosha?
When I went to school, and me and my brothers and sisters went to school, there were not a lot of Hispanics. The Hispanics were out in summers, with summers right now, and they were going to, a lot of them went to county, they were going to school out in the county. So we didn't really see a lot of Hispanics, or have a lot of Hispanic friends till we got to 9th grade, when they started getting bussed in because they didn't have a middle school or a high school out in the county. So our friends, the people we hung around with were primarily African American, because they didn't live too far away from where we lived on 14th Avenue. The African Americans at that time tended to live along the railroad track. Mm-hmm. So they were usually on the east side of the railroad track. When I was little. And a lot of them went to the Bonnie Hames. They lived in the Bonnie Hames area, and then that burnt down and they kind of got scattered. So we had more friends that were African American than we had that were Hispanic until we got to middle school, and then we connected, and there were a lot of Hispanic kids. So, but when I was growing up, we almost knew every family in Kenosha. I felt like my parents knew every family. There weren't that many.
Okay, and when you were in elementary school, what was the daily education experience like?
Well, it's ironic, but Kenosha Unified did a survey of high school students about 20 years ago when I was on the school board the first time, and the comments made by the high school students really mirrored how I felt when I was in high school, and I think how we felt. Isolated, not fitting in completely. You couldn't speak, they didn't want you speaking Spanish. And especially with some of our Italian friends, we had a lot of friends that were Italian, but the parents were opposed to any dating or anything with Hispanics, so we were really considered lower class. And the white, you know, you get in middle school and high school and you start dating, and, you know, then it became obvious that we were Hispanic, and, you know, my brothers couldn't date girls that they liked or that liked them because the parents would be opposed to that. So there was that kind of discrimination going on, and I think it was definitely a sink or swim. If you had a good handle on the English language and you were a student, you would make it. But those that didn't usually got held behind, so they were a grade or two behind. I have a brother that got held a grade back, so he went to school with my other brother, and they were a year apart, but they were in the same grade. So everybody always wondered, why are they in the same grade? Well, because his English wasn't good enough, and so they kept them back a year. So our experience was, you know, we were treated more poorly than some of the other students, and if you had that language barrier, you got held back. So you didn't get the resources to help you learn English, you just got held back. So that was, you know, that was pretty hard to take for some of the students. I know my brother, it always bothered my brother that he was a year behind.
Almost like a punishment or something.
Yeah, like a punishment, and just because, you know, his English wasn't as good.
Were there programs at the time to help Hispanic students learn English?
Yeah, my parents immediately, we were immersed in English, so that they didn't want us to speak in Spanish, so they stopped speaking Spanish in the home. In fact, my two youngest sisters, one's 5 years younger and one's 11 years younger, they don't know any Spanish. Those of us that were the 7, we do. But, so there were no good programs, bilingual programs in that day. There are now, but back then, like I said, you either sank or you swam and you made it. You know, you were able to make it if you had enough of the English that you could read a test and answer it. Or so resources in the schools weren't either were non-existent or weren't very good back then. And we're talking about now in the probably in the 60s and the 70s. And things improved, you know, as time went on.
Okay, what was, when you graduated high school, what was your first job?
My first job was, I worked at American Motors in the office. So I was the first Latina to work in the salaried workforce. I don't know if they had any in the factory, and I think they did. But my first job was at American Motors, and I was there a total of 8.5 years on and off. So it was really more like 15 years, but you know, there were a lot of layoffs in between there. So between that and civil service at Great Lakes Naval Base, I was clerical, I was a secretary, and I got promoted to executive secretary.
And how did that on-off work?
Yeah, it was very common for American Motors, even in the salaried workforce, to lay off. The factory laid off every year, and salaried workers would get laid off kind of simultaneously. So you'd work 2 years, get laid off for 2 years, come back for a year, get laid off. But they would always call you back. So there was always these recall rates, and it was 2 years that I remember. So they managed to always call us back before we lost our recall rates. So this went on for about 15 years on and off, and I got about 8 years in each place, in civil service and at American Motors.
Okay, and then how did that go as far as your future employment? That was 15 years or so, you're talking your early 30s.
Right. Yeah, well, I benefited from when Chrysler took over American Motors, when they bought American Motors, and although we all lost our jobs in the salary workforce, 90% of us lost our jobs, that experience that I had really worked out for me, and what helped me a lot was they paid tuition for you to get a 2-year degree if you wanted one. So I went back to school and I got an accounting degree that was fully paid for by the retraining program. And so that helped me to get a higher paying job above what a secretary gets paid, and I learned a new skill and had new experiences. So I credit American Motors and Chrysler for giving me that added education that I needed.
Okay, and then where did you work after
Okay.
that?
Okay, and then from from there, from American Motors, I actually got hired for a short time by Commonwealth Edison, again in clerical. I was secretary there. I think I was there for a couple years, and then I got tired of the commute to Northbrook, Illinois, so I got hired by Outboard Marine Corporation in Waukegan. So that was closer to home. I was an accountant there, and got promoted to a staff accountant. So I stayed there until that company went bankrupt. So that ended that one. So Chrysler did they sold out, and I lost my job there. And then at Upper Marine, they went bankrupt, so I lost my job there. So I'm very, very familiar with losing your job and having to get another job, and you just keep going.
You've long been active in the Hispanic community. What were some of those experiences?
Well, I got my start with one of my mentors who passed this year, Irene Santos, no relation to our family, but she was involved with UMOS, United Migrant Opportunity Services, and then with the Spanish Center. So we had a Spanish Center that was open for many, many years. And she would always call on me to help her, help people in the community. And then to also, I would help her find funds for the center. So I would get corporate donations for her. I would get, I had connections to get food donations and donations for Christmas parties. So I got involved with the Spanish Center through Irene Santos, and then eventually served on the board of directors, where I served for about 20 years.
And when did this start working with the Spanish Center?
Yeah, the Spanish Center, I actually started working with them. It had to be, I was maybe about 20 years old, and I was always working in an office where, Irene would call me and say, Yolanda, we need some money for, some families need help, and so I would get some donations. So I started very young, probably in my 20s, and then just continued on, until they closed. And it was, I was more like, I was the corporate conduit person. She did most of the work with the contact with the Spanish-speaking families. And then she would reach out to me for either some funding, or sometimes it was just as simple as she needed a letter. And I had the ability, I was a secretary for years, so I had the ability to draft letters and do them properly with proper English and formatting and paragraphing. I'm very good at in English and in writing letters. So that really helped her. So when we worked as a team, so it was she and I, and together we were able to help a lot of people that had a language barrier or just didn't know how to request assistance. So
Okay.
just been many years. I was very sad to see the Spanish Center close when the board of directors had made the decision to close down the 501c3. That was a very sad day for Kenosha.
Why did it close?
It was a new board of directors. Those of us that were on it for a long time had gotten off it. And it was maybe like 5 years before it closed. It was a different board. And they lost funding from the state. Well, it was a state grant. It was a huge grant. It was the Energy Assistance Program. The Spanish Center had it for years. And it was the big grant that pretty much kept the center alive. And they moved from the original building to what's the Boys and Girls Club now. And in that transition, they had a lot of problems. They couldn't get their computers up and running, their phone lines up and running. People were complaining that they weren't getting calls back for the Energy Assistance Program. And so a decision was made to pull that grant. And when they pulled that grant, and gave it to UMOS, United Migrant Opportunity Services, there was very little funding left. And so what happened was, instead of working hard to find new grants or fundraising, during a little down period, the board chose to, what I felt like, take the easy way out and just close the doors. We advocated to keep it open. Those of us, Tony Garcia, myself, Carmen Ireland, we went to the county executive, who was Jim Cruiser at the time, and we said, please don't close the center. We'll come back. We'll help you. This decision was still made. So it was a board decision, and the board did close the center. It has not reopened since.
Has that left a huge gap?
Oh, huge. In fact, even just as recent as last night, people are calling, like, where do we go? We have people that need help. What's the Hispanic organization in Kenosha? There is none. There's organizations that do help the Spanish speaking, and they help as best they can. But there's no center whose target group is Hispanics and monolingual Spanish speakers. That's what's missing today. They have it in every other city around us, but not in Kenosha. We do not have it in Kenosha. They have multiple agencies in Milwaukee. They have some in Racine. They have the Chavez Center. And we have no agency whose primary target group is Spanish-speaking Hispanics.
Is that for lack of people who want to do that work? Is it for lack of an agency willing to step in at the ground levels and say, we have a presence, now let's go from that? What actually is the difficulty?
Well, I think like the other organizations that were always better funded than the Spanish Center, I think they just took little pieces of it and they say, well, we're helping Spanish speaking here. We have a number of agencies. Again, they're doing a good job, but they're not that center where the people can go and have a comfort level where everyone speaks Spanish, and it's just different. And so there's a big void in Kenosha. So there's just little pockets everywhere. And those of us that belong to organizations like the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, Forward Latino, United Migrant Opportunity Services, we do have membership in these, but we don't have this center, this community-based organization with offices and staff and faxes that they can use, and we don't have that anymore. We're all volunteers. Nobody gets paid, and that's a big difference when you're a volunteer and when you're a paid staff. So to answer that question, there's been a void since the Spanish Center closed, and that void continues today, and the population has grown with some newer issues that unfortunately are not being addressed.
Okay. What other organizations were you a part of?
Well, I probably would have to fill 2 pages of a resume to list all the ones I have been involved in, because I've always believed in community service. So currently I'm involved with Forward Latino, who has it's nationally based and state-based and locally based. Involved with the League of United Latin American Citizens, as I mentioned, LULAC. I'm involved with I continue to be involved with the NAACP, Kenosha branch, and at the state level. I'm involved with SEWRPAC, Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, on their Environmental Justice Task Force since 2007. And I'm involved in some of the Kenosha Unified, the Head Start program. We have a parent advisory group. I'm involved there. I'm involved with the American Association of University Women, and I'm involved with the Rotary of Kenosha. So those are the ones that I spend my time with today. But I've been involved in the past with United Way, with American Red Cross, and with Sarah Jobs for Progress. So I have a good feel for what the organizations do, and I was one person who kind of went out of my comfort level and didn't only serve on Hispanic organizations, but served on organizations whose target groups are African Americans or health related. I served on the Kenosha Community Health Center board. So I've reached out to different organizations that I felt could use my my volunteerism in my lifetime.
You said you were involved with the NAACP. Was that early in your life?
Yeah, that was very early. I served under when John Wright was alive, and I've been serving since the 1970s. And that was an organization. At the time, we did not have LULAC. So LULAC is a civil rights organization, like the NAACP. So we didn't have LULAC. So my original work in civil rights was with the NAACP.
And were they advocating for Hispanics?
They were advocating for everybody. And what I found, though, through my membership with the NAACP, was very hard for me to get fellow Latinos to join NAACP because, like a lot of people, their idea of the NAACP is it's only for African Americans, which has never been true. It was founded by white civil rights leaders along with the black civil rights leaders. So it was hard for me to get Latinos to join NAACP here in Kenosha, so then we brought LULAC back to Kenosha. LULAC had been dormant for a number of years.
And what actually is LULAC, and what's its history?
Yeah, LULAC is very similar to NAACP. The organizational structure is almost the same. They have local folks that work on issues in their local community. They have a state body, they have a regional, and they have a national board. So I have served on the national board for LULAC, and they deal mostly with civil rights, but very education focused. So they do a lot of scholarships, and they do a lot of, they've done a lot of lawsuits around education and discrimination in education. And actually, LULAC founded the Head Start program. They had what was called the Little School of the 400. It was 400 words that Spanish-speaking students needed to learn, English words that they needed. If they could just master those 400 words, they could catch up to their peers who were English speakers. And that evolved into what Head Start is today, and that's why I have a big interest in Head Start. So LULAC is, again, we compare it to NAACP. They're somewhat the same, only different target groups, but their membership's open to everybody. So anybody can join these organizations. You do not have to be a person of color. And we have lots of members who are not Hispanic or African American serving on these national organizations. I was also involved with the Poor People's Campaign. I was the state director for the Poor People's Campaign, which was the campaign that Martin Luther King never got to continue because of his death, because of his assassination. So that was another organization that was pretty dear to my heart because it followed the principles of nonviolence and the teachings of Martin Luther King. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Okay, and for a time, LULAC and the NAACP were coordinating things?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was when Brother Wright was alive. I actually came up with the idea, and we were doing redistricting at the time. It was the redistricting the maps, just like, what has gone on recently with the gerrymandering. And so we had a watchful eye on what was happening in Kenosha and Racine and Milwaukee with the redistricting at that time and the census. So that's about the time, that was in 1999, when I decided to bring LULAC to Kenosha. So we opened a LULAC branch in Kenosha that had been, again, dormant since like the 70s. And so when we had an issue, it was really better that we had two organizations that spoke up and out. So we had NAACP, which had that name recognition across the nation, and was very effective in the 90s under Brother Wright. And then we had LULAC now, which again was nationally based. So we brought LULAC national board members to Milwaukee and to Kenosha for different issues. So, but getting back to that, we what I called it was we hit it with a double barrel. You had two civil rights organizations, the Latino organization and the African American organization that was watching what was going on with redistricting, what was going on with, at the polls with voting, what was going on with the hiring in big corporations, including the Kenosha Unified School District. So we had two organizations, not just one, and it was very effective.
Okay, what was LULAC's main purpose?
Civil rights and anti-discrimination. So people that felt that they were being discriminated in the workplace, people that felt they were being discriminated as it related to services that they should be receiving, they would call LULAC. And housing was a big issue, discrimination in housing. We actually had a LULAC Housing Commission that I served on. So I was a national board member on the Housing Commission. So I used to take trips to Texas, to Houston, where we had our main office. But housing was another one. There was nowhere in Kenosha to file a housing complaint.
Or
there
anybody.
wasn't. And they'd say, go to the city attorney. But who was documenting the number of complaints? Who was going and talking to the landlord on behalf of the tenant that felt that they were being discriminated against? And we went to court with a lot of individuals who felt they were being discriminated against. We also did court watching, where we would go sit in on court, take our turn and sit in and hear how the judges were ruling in certain cases. Was there unfair sentencing? Was one individual getting a slap on the wrist or a little probation and another one getting 20 years? And that was happening. So LULAC and both LULAC and then the NAACP were very involved in Get Out the Vote. And also in health, I didn't mention health. We're very much health advocates. Making people aware of the effects of not having a healthy diet, not going to see your doctor. So we're very one of the prongs of what we do is around health as well.
Were they involved in citizenship issues?
Yes. LULAC has always encouraged non-citizens to become citizens. So we had kits that were citizenship kits, and we would hold classes, and we would actually go with people to take their test. So citizenship is something that we promote. We want everyone to become a citizen. We know that it's hard. We know that it takes longer today than it did 20 years ago, but we're there to help them understand what the requirements are to become a citizen, and help in any way that we can with our volunteers.
Okay, and today there's another migration of Hispanic people coming into this country and thereby coming into Kenosha and other places. How is it different today than it was when your family came from San Antonio?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I mentioned that they were coming from Texas, primarily Texas, New Mexico, those southern states that had large populations of Hispanic, but mostly Texas. In recent years, we're seeing the migration not from Texas, but they're coming from Mexico, from Central America, they're coming from South America. So for us here in Kenosha, we normally see the people from Mexico that are new arrivals that are coming for the same reasons my parents did. They're coming to get better paying jobs and better schooling for their kids, and they're willing to sacrifice everything and leave everything behind and family behind just to come with their children and start a new life. So the difference is these people are from Mexico, and a lot of them do not speak English, where the migration from Texas, they spoke Spanglish. They had a little bit of English, but they needed help, to pass in school and things like that, But they had some English language ability. I think what we're seeing now is people that are coming that are just monolingual Spanish speakers. So they have a tougher time assimilating into life here in Kenosha or in Wisconsin without, with that language barrier, that complete language barrier.
So how does this affect their education in Kenosha? With the difference, you went to school, you had some English, you had to start with the language. People coming today don't have that. So what is going on for them to succeed, and what's out there to help them do it?
Okay, well, the good news is there are bilingual programs now. There's English language learner programs, there's English second language programs, there's traditional bilingual programs that we didn't have when we came. But again, at least we had that little head start by having a little bit of mastery of English. And the other difference is we grew up with English speakers. So I told you my neighborhood, we didn't have everybody speaking Spanish. We had a lot of English speakers around us, which we know helps you learn English faster. So they're coming more, and they don't have the English language, so they tend to be with others that speak Spanish only, and the adults with the children don't seem to be picking up the language as fast as our parents did, because they're surrounded by Spanish speakers, where my parents were surrounded by English speakers. When my dad went to work at American Motors, they weren't speaking Spanish, and so they picked up the English really quick. And that's a model, actually. There's a dual language model at Kenosha Unified where you have 50% English speakers, 50% Spanish speakers. They pick up from each other so fast. They'll pick up the other language if they're hanging around with people that speak that language. So that's the comparison I make is, if you're always around Spanish-speaking people, it's really hard for you to learn English. And that's what's happening today, and they're really struggling to learn the English language. But the good news is, there are a lot more programs out there, but they need to be aware of the programs, and they need assistance enrolling in those programs, and so it's different than it was when my parents came.
Do the current migration of students, parents, do they have the same drive toward education as perhaps your parents may have had because they were in Texas and you were in school? Is there a difference today in that way?
Well, in my opinion, and in my opinion only, I think that the students that come from Mexico and their parents are more excited about college and getting education than the Hispanics, when I went to junior high and high school. I say we were Americanized. We were Americanized, and you get Americanized, and you kind of lose your culture a little bit, and then this was like the Vietnam era. And, people were dropping out of high school to go to the factory. They weren't going to college because they could get a job at American Motors, so college wasn't emphasized. Where the people from Mexico come, and they're the ones that are opening up the restaurants. They're highly skilled. They just have the language barrier, but they seem to be. The adults seem to be better educated than our parents were. So I have to say that. I think we have if we can get them, if we can help them get their citizenship if they don't have it. These are people that open up the businesses and whose children are going to college. I always said there's something magical that happens in a bilingual education class where they have teachers that look like them. So you have bilingual teachers that are Hispanic, speak Spanish. Those kids that are in bilingual ed are the ones that tend to go to college. There's something about that program where the teachers really care about them, and they encourage them to stay in school, not to drop out, to get good grades, to go to college. Those are the ones we see go to college more than the Americanized Tejano, Tex-Mex student who feels like oh, I can just get a job, or I don't need college. I can just go get a job over at this factory. And it's okay. Factory works, fine if that's what you want. But I'm just saying that these kids need to have choices. They need to be able to pick. Should I go to college or should I go into the factory? And if they don't, if they don't get that opportunity to understand or to be coached into, this one will get you a better paying job in the long run, then they're probably going to pick the easier way out, which is, I'm 18, I can just go get a job at the factory.
Remembering what it was like when you went to school, and with your membership on the school board, what's it like for a Hispanic student from Mexico, South America, Central America, in the school system today?
In the school system today, and if we're talking the ones that are put into bilingual ed, and
or just the difficulty that they face, are they more accepted today than they were back when you went to school?
I don't think so. I think that isolation and discrimination is still there. They don't feel comfortable. There's just not enough teachers that look like them. There's just not enough. There's not the school clubs. At one time we had a group called Hermanas and Hermanos when I was on the board 20 years ago under Norris Jones, and we don't have that anymore. And that kind of brought them together. So I think they struggle. I think they struggle to fit in, and I don't think we're giving them all the resources that they need. I think a lot of them have been taken away. The bilingual program, as I knew it 20 years ago when I served, and now that I'm back, it's been just changed. It's been changed so much. It's not the same program, and I don't have the facts to support this, but I do believe it was better the other way. So there's less choice now. You used to be able to pick from 4 models, and now I think there's 2. And I think that students are struggling, but I'm not as familiar with it as I used to be, because again, I used to do a lot with the Spanish Center and Irene Santos. So I'm a little removed from that now. But I do hear from the teachers, the ELL teachers and the ESL teachers, that these kids are not getting the services that they're entitled to. There's a lot of pullout going on. So, for instance, a school has a teacher call in sick, and there's no substitute. So then the ELL teacher or the ESL teacher gets pulled out to be the teacher in that classroom. So now there's no one there to provide the services to the student that needs that extra 20 minutes, whatever it is, in English. So, we're working on those at the district. We're talking to the teachers, and we're starting to work on, why is some of this stuff happening. But I think they're struggling. I think they're struggling just like they always did. I still don't think we're doing a good job in Kenosha with any of the students that require English as a second language, and there's other languages as well, many others. It's not just Spanish, but I do not think we're doing a good job with those students.
And how about
we can do better.
How about those students who are just in a regular 4th grade class, a regular 6th grade class? What goes on for them? Mm-hmm. Are there anything they can?
Yeah, I have grandkids in the elementary schools, and I think it's a better environment for them than it was when we were in those grades. I don't think the kids are the students, their peers are they don't see them as Hispanic as much as when we were kids. I think we were really, it was really, if you had dark skin, that was something bad. I don't think the students are that bad today, and that's progress, right? I think that's a good thing. So I don't hear complaints from my granddaughters about, I was called this or I was called that, or, So I think it's better today, and it's probably because our whole culture has changed in Kenosha. It's gotten better.
So, as far as Hispanics, adults and students in general, what are their challenges today in this community, as well as how you see the future kind of coming?
Well, I think, the new problem they face is, and this is in the last 4 years, is, the stereotype now that, that everybody's, first of all, everybody's from Mexico, which isn't true. They think we're all from Mexico. I'm from the United States. I was born in San Antonio, Texas. So we didn't have that before. Before it's always. So I think the challenge is today is more. Racism seems to have taken a rise again in recent years, and it's here in Kenosha too. So the challenge is more around the politicizing of people of color that we've seen in the last 4 years. So that's a new challenge for them, I think. But the hatred that comes with that, the deep hatred that I don't think we saw. We saw discrimination, but they just didn't just hate you. I think we're seeing some really deep hatred of people of color, and it's just popped up in the last few years. I mean, I used to think Kenosha was really, really a nice place to live as compared to some of the other cities around us, right? I mean, Waukegan to the south, Milwaukee to the north. And, we're seeing an increase in violence and an increase in hatred, just plain hatred in this country, but also in Kenosha. So those are new challenges for the adults here. It's
How
hard
about
to
finding jobs or a place to live?
Yeah, hard to find a place to live in Kenosha. Kenosha has pretty much become a city where if you're low income, there's just no housing here. You can't afford all these apartments that are going up. They're unaffordable. There's not enough affordable housing being built. We do have those lofts on 22nd, which were nice, but there are not that many there. A lot of the affordable housing were in neighborhoods like in District 10 that have been knocked down, and we've got, what's good about Kenosha is we don't have real poor neighborhoods like we used to have when I was growing up. We had the Skid Row on 63rd and 14th, and the old Lincoln neighborhood when I was growing up, but we don't have that anymore. But with that came unaffordable housing for low-income people. So we don't tend to get low-income people that stop and live in Kenosha. They tend to go either south to Waukegan, where they can get an apartment for $300-400, or they go to Racine, or they go to Milwaukee, but they can't afford the rents in Kenosha. So we're not seeing our low-income population growing in Kenosha because there's nowhere for them to live here. So it kind of is stagnant, kind of just stays the same every year.
What would you say, just I guess anecdotally, would be that price point of affordability? Now, I know rents are all across the board and going higher every year. What is that point at which what you think of low income and what is an affordable rent?
I think $600. What used to be $300 apartments in District 10 are now $1,000. They haven't been improved any. They're just as dilapidated as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and now the rents are $1,000. So you can get a 2-bedroom in Racine for $500-600. So why would you live in Kenosha if you had to pay $1,000 and you can just go 15 minutes north and live in Racine and get the same type of apartment, 4-unit or 8-unit or whatever, and get it for almost half. So I think $600. It used to be, rents used to be. We used to have an apartment that we rented out at the Urban. It was $300 a month, and that was just 7 years ago. So, $500 was pricey back then. So I would say, with the increase in everything, probably around $600 But $1,000 for an apartment that has not been rehabbed in 20 years, and it's just too
Well,
much.
that isn't like all the apartments that are
No.
$1,000, but
No, but that's the cheapest apartments that used to be where the low-income people are living in right now. Those low-income people are paying $1,000 for rent. That's too high.
and for students today and tomorrow, where do you see that going? Or what could happen?
I don't follow you on that
Oh,
question.
I just meant, students going to school today
Yeah.
and what their future holds,
Yeah.
being
Yes.
in Kenosha, in the community.
Well, we have I think we're growing in the available jobs. We do have the U-Line, we have Amazon, and they all pay well. We have the big companies, box companies out in the county, and I think Kenosha and Racine have some really good paying available jobs that replace the factory jobs we used to have back when the manufacturing was here. So there's some good jobs, and they seem to be getting, you can get a job at Amazon. There's some that can't, but most people can get hired there. So the students, as far as what degrees they're getting, I think I'd like to see them, become the teachers that we need, in Kenosha Unified, and you can get up in the pay scale, in education. If you continue your education and you get another degree and another degree, your salary goes up. So the benefits are great. People always just look at the salary of our employees at Kenosha Unified, but the benefit package, you really got to look at the whole benefit package, and it is far better than a lot of other jobs. So the students, I think, need, they're going into fields that many of which we have in Kenosha, but some that we don't. So we'll lose those students to other states. But I think, I think we're creating enough jobs in Kenosha now that we can keep some of our students here.
When you look in the eyes of Hispanic students today, do you see a desire to achieve more? Do you see them looking like they're going to go somewhere else? What do you see as their dream? Or do they show or feel outwardly that there's a future for them?
Well, I think for Hispanic students, many of our students are still very tied with their families. Our kids don't tend to leave so much like other kids, I think. It's the familia thing. Our kids, they tend to stay because they want to be around family. We're very still close with our children, even when they're adults. So, I don't think in the Hispanic the Hispanic families, we see a lot of our kids, leaving for California or for Chicago. I think they tend to hang around mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. So,
But
yeah.
to still achieve more.
Oh yeah. I think education is back, being cool again. And when I was a high school student, it wasn't. Everybody was either getting drafted or, they didn't want to go to college. But I think college has become cool again, and we have some really good things going on in Kenosha. We still have the college tour that Alvin Owens, puts on every year that gets kids excited about going to college, and that works. They do. We used to take students to the U.S. Hispanic Leadership Institute conference in Chicago, which was a big promotion of, go to college. And we haven't done that in a couple of years, and I think COVID kind of put an end to that, but maybe we'll get that started up again. But I think our students are currently, our kids are excited about going to college. So I think we're going to see more kids in college. Again,
Well,
I think it's become cool again. They want to pursue higher education. It's not. It's something that they're looking up to. I'm lucky that I have older granddaughters that I have a granddaughter that's at West Point, and that's a big motivator for her cousins, my other granddaughters. that she's, you know, in college at the U.S. Military Academy, and they just think highly of her. So when the students have that role model, whether it's a family member or someone they know, they just get excited about doing the same thing. So I even had a granddaughter that dressed up as a soldier, because my daughter's been in the military for 24 years. Dressed up for Halloween as a soldier because she thought that was something that she wanted to be. So that role model is still important. So, you know, when we have our older kids or our older grandchildren go into college, that's such a motivator for the younger ones. And so we're seeing more of that among our students.
Well, thank you for talking with me today.
Okay. All right. Thank you.